right, welcome back. The director of Andre the Giant, which debuts April 10th on HBO. People watching it here last night in Los Angeles. Jason Hehir is joining us. He has produced the Fab Five, the 85 Bears. This is what you do for a living. So I got to start with this on Andre the Giant. As a kid, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Macho Man Randy Savage. You didn't see Andre fight a lot. He wasn't Hulk Hogan was on my TV, Stone Cold. Was some of this because why? I mean, Andre, how big of a star was he?
In the 70s or 80s, he was as big or as recognizable a celebrity, certainly in the sports world, as anybody. Because this is pre-internet, this is pre-YouTube, it's pre-cable television. So Andre the Giant, the name, first of all, is catchy. And then there was a certain fascination about him because he was so rarely used. And that was strategic, is that guys like Hogan and Snuka and those guys, they could fight because they could conceivably beat each other every week. Andre was never going to get beat, or else kind of the myth of wrestling was going to be exposed.
That's what I was going to say. It felt like twice a year you saw him fight.
Yeah, so that was strategic. They made it a big deal for him to beat. Now, you may be talking about the 80s. In the 70s, you're talking about the territorial era of wrestling.
Yes.
So that was divided up into a bunch of
regions,
fiefdoms throughout the country. And Vince McMahon Sr.'s was one of those territories. And Vince Sr., who managed Andre in the 70s, starting in the mid-70s, would loan him out to these territories. And if you lived in, say, St. Louis, you had no idea who the wrestling characters were in Memphis or in Charlotte. You just knew your St. Louis people. But if you lived in St. Louis, Andre came once a year to your place, and it was a massive deal. And that was strategic. They wanted him to be a featured attraction of this, this gargantuan 7'4", 520 pound, we put in quotes because we're bending the truth a little bit, that would come to your town. So people would come and flock to see him.
What did other wrestlers think of him physically? Anybody, did they love him? Were they fearful of him?
Most of them, they were all respectful of him. Most of them appreciated him because he was very careful not to injure anybody in the ring.
And could have.
Very well could have. And as we know, wrestling is these are scripted outcomes.
Right.
And so if he wanted to go off script and was having a bad day or didn't like the way you were behaving, he could just sit on you, and then that would change what the outcome of the match was going to be.
Jason, did he ever have a wrestler he didn't like?
He did not like Randy Savage. He did not like Iron Sheik.
Did he go after him physically?
Yeah, we show it in the film. We talk about it in the film. Is that he was a very generous wrestler. So he would come into these territories, and if you could just get your licks in for 5 minutes against Andre the Giant, you were going to be the hero in your territory.
Okay.
And Andre was acutely aware of that. So he would come in and actually let these guys beat up on him, and then he was the one getting his hand raised in the end. But these local champions were deified then, that this guy actually beat Andre the Giant up for 5 minutes. Now, of course, it was all, an entertainment. It was an act.
So what did Randy do to tick him off?
Andre thought was a little bit loud, a little impertinent. Andre respected people who respected the business, and he was of the opinion that Randy wanted to be a superstar and not go through the right steps of being in the business.
So that's
on a grand sense.
When they wrestled, Andre made it physical.
He did. The other thing that he didn't like is that Randy used to lather himself in baby oil. And Andre hated wrestling because he would get baby oil all over himself. So Randy would come in and say, how are we going to do this? And everyone was very respectful of him. And Andre would just scream at him to get out of the locker room and take the baby oil off of himself.
This is an odd question, but wrestling's about traveling.
Mm-hmm.
How did Andre travel?
The frequency was that he traveled over 300 nights a year. He was on the road.
God.
And for a guy of that size, you're talking about someone who's living in a world where nothing is made.
How do you get to the bathroom?
The bathroom, he couldn't fit in a lot of bathrooms.
Right.
I don't want to get too graphic on basic cable TV, but there's certain things that he had to do to accommodate him. On planes, for instance, he sat first class whenever possible, and he would have to go up to where the bathroom is. He could not fit on a plane in a plane bathroom, in an airplane bathroom. So you're talking about a 14-hour flight to Narita, Japan.
Oh, my God.
They would have to pull the curtain up in the galley, and then he would relieve himself into the trash can, and then the staff would take the trash can and take that into the bathroom. But this is what he went through on a daily basis.
He was a joyful fighter visually. That seems incredibly sad. Was he a sad person?
There was a certain solemnity to him from the people who know him best, there was an underlying sadness there that this was his lot in life. But also, I hope that people don't watch the film and take away that this was a sad life and a sympathetic figure, because Andre lived life to the fullest. This is someone who knew from a very early age that he had a limited amount of time on this earth.
He did.
And he was going to make the most of it.
Because his family was not as large. He had a rare disease.
He had acromegaly, which we know colloquially as gigantism.
Okay, so, and he knew he was a gentle kid. He didn't abuse his power. And he knew early, you're saying, that it was a short time on Earth.
Well, he knew, he was told officially, this is one of the things we tried to really get to the root of the stories that we know about Andre. There's two directions you can go with a doc like this. You can go farcical, and you can tell all the stories, the hearsay. I heard he drank 200 beers. I heard this. One of those legends is that he was told by a Japanese doctor when he was wrestling in Japan in the early 70s that he had this disease and he wouldn't live past 40. We couldn't find anyone who could verify that. We did find a doctor who did surgery on his ankle in Boston in the early 80s, and according to him, he's in the doc. According to him, he was the first one to tell Andre, because he said Andre was not aware that he had a disease. And the ironic part is that the disease was treatable. It's not reversible. He wouldn't shrink back to the size of a normal person.
But treatable.
But they could curtail the effects, because what you do is you go through several adolescences, basically. You're not growing at a proportional rate your whole life, but you and I go through adolescence in our teenage years.
Yeah.
Andre went through another one when he was in his early 20s, another one. So if you look at his shoes from the 70s, which we had, and the shoes that he died in, the night that he died in 1993, the 1993 shoes are far bigger than the size 22s from the 70s, because he kept on going through these growth spurts, and he was going through his final growth spurt when he passed away in 93.
I wonder, he was a legendary drinker. Was that due to pain? Was it a numbing effect, or is he just a guy that liked to go out and have fun?
He didn't like being alone, and part of his drinking was the social aspect. He would, he'd pay the bartender to keep the bar open until late at night so he could be around people. Because think about it, the alternative when you're on the road for 300 nights a year is to go back to your hotel room in a bed that's tiny, in a bathroom that's tiny. It's not a comfortable place for him. But if he gets a table in the corner with his friends, he can drink all night. The other thing was that he was self-medicating, because as his life went on, he was in more and more pain.
Of course. Yeah. A lot of those wrestlers, it's tough life. It's a lot of travel.
Saw, Hogan was there last night, which made news in wrestling circles and maybe beyond that. But when you see Hulk walk around, this is a guy who's had 8 or 9 surgeries on his back, on his shoulders, on his knees. Right. They say wrestling's fake, and Hogan told us off camera. No one told me that. No one told my orthopedic surgeon that, because these are actual real injuries that we have.
Yeah, anything you learned you didn't know, or was it a complete discovery, Jason, for you, the whole thing?
What I learned was that a lot of these stories are mythologized.
Even where he's from.
Our process normally as documentarians and filmmakers is we have to gather all the information we can, the facts, and then go out and interview the people who can expand on those facts and make a story out of it. And one of the first things we have a luxury to do now in 2018 as a filmmaker is be lazy and Google facts and go to Wikipedia. The first line of his Wikipedia page is false. It says Andre René Roussimoff was born in 1946 in Grenoble, France.
That's wrong.
That's 6 hours south of where Andre was born, which was right outside of Paris.
Why did they put that?
They put that because when he began wrestling, his backstory was that he was discovered in the French Alps as a lumberjack who moved a tree out of the way of a road that people were trying to go down, and they brought him to the States, and he started wrestling there. And the only recognizable town in the French Alps to North American audiences was Grenoble, because they hosted the Winter Olympics back in the 60s.
What was his record as a wrestler? How many times did he lose?
Unclear, because, they billed him as undefeated, and that's one of the many things, the many examples of pro wrestling bending the truth. But like Jerry Lawler was a guy who wrestling fans would know, and some other non-wrestling fans would know. Andre was wrestling in Jerry's territory in Memphis, and Jerry said, "Hey, what do you think about you losing tonight?"
20 seconds. What happened?
He said, "I'm not going to lose. You're not going to beat me, but I'll lose by a count out, and you can raise your hand. So technically, I'll lose." And Vince McMahon Sr. was not happy about that, because he wanted the undefeated Andre going territory to territory.
This is great. Jason Hehir, the director of Andre the Giant documentary, debuts April 10th, HBO. We're out of time. Absolute pleasure. Watch it.